We'll now move to questions about what you've heard that I'll ask on your behalf. To facilitate social distancing, we're on audio only, but I'm joined by all the Croda speakers from the first half of the presentation, including Steve Foots, as well as Jez Maiden, CFO. This Q&A will finish at 25 past, when you should click on the link for part 2 before you grab a coffee, so that we can start the second half promptly at 5:30. We've also asked you some questions as part of a survey on the right-hand side of the screen. The first question comes from Liz at McInroy and Wood. She asks, how quickly will peers in the chemical sector move towards a more sustainable strategy and away from petrochemical raw materials? Steve.
Well, afternoon and good question, and afternoon to everybody else as well. So, I think it's an imperative that everybody moves towards more renewable ingredients. Given there's a strong push, particularly in the consumer world, from all of us who are buying the products, which is now transitioning through to our customers' behaviour, then as a supplier, we have a responsibility to listen to that and do something about that. So I think everybody will be trying, but everybody's coming from different positions. We all did organic chemistry when we were at school, and organic chemistry in the chemical industry is still the major practical chemistry. So a lot of that's petrochemical. So a lot of people have to move a long way, and it will take them a lot longer. But fortunately for Croda, we're in a strong position, as you've heard. Let me just ask Phil. Do you want to add anything to that?
Yeah. Hi, Steve. Hi, everyone. The only comments I'd make is, as you said, recognise it is a challenge for many, as their supply chains are often back integrated into petrochemical refineries. And as we know, bio-based suppliers are a different breed, and we've got a lifetime of experience of working in this area. I did mention in my presentation a sector example, looking at the EU chemical sector. They're targeting a 25% bio-based raw material content from 2030, which is up from 10% today. And I guess the last point to make is, we believe we're the only player in the chemical industry that's identified life on land, SDG 15, in our as a direct strategy that we can directly impact, which we recognise does put us in a slightly separate position.
Thank you, Phil. There's a couple more here for you, I think. So Michael at Columbia Threadneedle wants to know, how do we quantify our current portfolio, and can we estimate revenues that have a climate and a land positive impact? Similarly, Eleanor at Fiera says, what percentage of your revenue is aligned to the SDGs, and do you have a future target for this?
Yeah, thanks, David. As I mentioned in my presentation, it's something we are actively working on and trying to answer the various metrics from around the industry on this. Just to specifically so I gave a couple of examples in my presentation where we talked about one way of measuring green revenues, another way to look at bio-based revenues, raw materials as part of our portfolio. We are investigating our revenues aligned to the UN SDGs. The challenge is we do want to avoid SDG washing. Forget greenwashing for a moment. Let's talk about SDG washing, and just ensure that any metrics we put in place are verifiable and robust. This is going to take a bit of time. We are finalising our metrics and plans through this year. So that's going to take a bit of time to then ensure we verify those. We are committed to looking at this and trying to provide more transparency, and we'll be working on that through 2021.
Thank you, Phil. So the next couple of questions triggered by Julia's presentation on becoming climate positive. The first question again from Michael is, in terms of our 4:1 carbon target, where are we now?
Thanks, David. So last year our reported carbon cover ratio was 0.8 to 1, but we are still very much in the discovery phase. There are many more carbon savings associated with the use of our ingredients to still be quantified. So we're still looking to move to, as I mentioned, we're moving to understanding our carbon cover impact across a broader range of broader application buckets, and we will have assessed our full portfolio by 2030, if not before.
Thanks, Julia. And a follow-up question from Rupert at UBP, who's saying we externally verified 4 case studies last year, how many products have been verified to date? Are we still at 4?
So at the moment, we're currently verifying a further 4 new case studies for 2020, and these are across our performance technologies and our life sciences sectors. Understanding the impact of our ingredients across their full life cycle does take time and a lot of collaboration with our customers, and so we're prioritising these based on our customers' needs, but we intend to increase that number of case studies every year.
Thank you, Julia. The next question comes from Oliver at HSBC, and I think this is probably one for Stuart. Can we expect a land use reduction impact target? And there's a similar question from Michael again at Threadneedle, who's asking the broader question: how can we quantify land positive?
Yeah, thanks, David. I think maybe Oliver's question came in a little bit before I got to that bit in my presentation. So hopefully you can see now that we are targeting to save more land than we use, which, you know, in many ways is akin to climate net zero. It's land net zero. So we think it's very important to be able to grow our business, to grow our bio-based content without increasing any land burden. So that's, I think, is a really positive and quite a differentiator for Croda compared to many of our peers. In terms of the quantification and the, I guess, the validation, the land use is actually quite easy to calculate. We know the average yields of the raw materials that we bring in. We're intimately involved in some of those supply chains, and therefore we know, you know, how much land in hectares we consume. On the other side of the equation, though, land saved is a little bit more difficult, a little bit more challenging to come up with. As far as we know, there are no protocols out there, and so we are developing our own. And the important thing here is to measure the portion that is attributable to Croda, because we are often in formulations, and therefore we don't own the whole of the land saved, we own a portion of it. So we're busy developing protocols. We have our first round of protocols prepared, and we are seeking external expert input to challenge those and ultimately to validate them, because we think it's important to have everything that we do externally validated in the end. But since this is such a key headline target for us, then that's, you know, one of the priorities that we've given.
Thanks, Stuart. A couple on biodiversity. Perhaps you want to pick up the first one, Stuart. It's from Liz again at McInroy and Wood, and she asks, how are management considering biodiversity when sourcing plant-based raw materials?
Yeah, thanks for your question, Liz. I mean, biodiversity is absolutely forefront in our minds. Again, I think your question might have come in a little earlier and before I got onto land positive. So hopefully you can see that the biodiversity part of land positive is playing out in our commitments there. And, you know, saving more land than we use does actually help mitigate the adverse effects on biodiversity. The other side of the equation is obviously our supply chain. And, you know, there's a number of important areas I think to probably tease out. It won't be all of them given the time, but palm, I think, is a really important one. We report to CDP forests, and palm is the only commodity that we're required to report on. And, you know, we're very pleased to say that we are in sight this year of very close to 100% RSPO certified palm derivatives. That's all derivatives, all finished ingredients, all markets. And, you know, I think we've been involved in this for quite some time. We've been quite public about our targets and in many ways punching above our weight. Another area that we're passionate about, and Chris will cover in the second half, is ASD, which is Action for Sustainable Derivatives. We're a founder member there, and Chris will talk to you about that. But again, that's all about transparency in the supply chain and understanding the risks of the plant-based ingredients that we consume. Our Sederma business has just recently passed the first stage of audit to becoming a full member of UEBT, which is the Union for Ethical Biotrade, which is all about sourcing with respect. So we're very proud of that. And then finally, not to give you too long an answer, we've just recruited a head of sustainable sourcing in Croda, the first ever time that we've had that position. It's a senior position, and that's very much designed and targeted at changing behaviour in our supply chain, particularly with an emphasis on biodiversity.
Thank you. One specific one on biodiversity, and then I'll move on to another topic. Do we have any initiatives to encourage songbirds? Julia?
Yeah, we have biodiversity initiatives at most of our sites around the world. At our headquarters in the UK, we've set up a biodiversity committee, and we've spent a lot of time surveying the wildlife on site, including songbirds. We've developed a woodland walk to allow employees to enjoy our sites. We've had rescue hedgehogs released on site. We've planted wildflowers, and we've installed bird feeders and boxes. And last year, we actually won the Humber Biodiversity Award in recognition of our efforts at both our headquarters in the UK, but also our manufacturing site in Hull. So,
okay.
Yes.
Thank you, Julia. Excellent. They're coming in thick and fast now, so we'll get back to anybody who we didn't cover. Gunther at Bernstein, can you please discuss what costs you've taken and what you anticipate to incur going forward to implement your ESG targets? One for the CFO, Jez, who's joined us.
All right, thanks, Gunther. Yeah, look, the great thing I always think with sustainability in Croda is the alignment generally between our financial and commercial objectives on the one hand and sustainability on the other. So in most cases, we've got an alignment here. So most of the costs that we incur is costs that we'd incur anyway in terms of either OPEX or in capital investment. Clearly, there are some areas where we're going to incur some costs. For example, the decarbonisation plans for each site will give rise to some additional capex. I wouldn't anticipate it being significant, certainly manageable within our existing programme, but we'll get more colour on that as the sites complete their plans this year and next year.
Thanks, Jez. We'll have to leave it there, I'm afraid, but there will be an opportunity for further questions at the end of the next section, and we'll follow up direct with anybody who's asked a question and hasn't had a response during the event. Hi, welcome back everybody. We'll now move on to questions about what you've heard that I'll ask on your behalf. I'm joined by all the Croda speakers from the entirety of the presentation, including Steve Foots, as well as Jez Maiden, CFO, and we've also asked you some questions in the survey on the right-hand side of the screen. The first question comes from Brendan at Scott Investments, who asked, what are the biggest challenges that you face in implementing your sustainability strategy?
Yeah, thanks, Brendan. I would say that the markets that we're operating in are changing now probably faster than I've seen them in 20 years. And so I think that the challenge for everybody, including Croda, is to make sure you can still, our model is to meet unmet needs from the customer. And I talk a lot in the presentation about, and we all do, about innovation and sustainability being an essential ingredient, both of them together to drive value. So you need to have the innovation as well as the sustainability, and we're very well positioned on sustainability. But the challenge, I guess, is to make sure that we move as quickly as we can in reinventing ourselves and responding to the needs with targeted product launches and everything great about the innovation stories in Croda. And I think on the weakness side, it's that as well. It's making sure we capture that growth at the right time as well. And if we lose the speed of innovation, then we lose the opportunity. But sustainability is a great opportunity for the group. And you will see that the SDGs will galvanise markets because governments will legislate, consumers will respond with changing buying habits, customers will respond with their changing buying habits, and Croda has to respond as well with making sure we satisfy any changes at the right time with great quality products. So that's it in a nutshell. And I think the most important thing for us is to make sure we're still customer driven whilst all these changes are happening, because plenty won't be in our industry, and we'll make sure that we will be. So we think there's a lot of good opportunities going forward.
Thank you. The next question is from Jack at JD Vistas, and he says, does Croda intend to make any divestments of technologies that are not contributing sufficiently to sustainability goals?
Yeah, I mean, it's a good question. I mean, through the lens of sustainability, and, we've talked to a lot of you before about a 10-year lens where we've, for the first time in the group, we have a 10-year strategy rather than just a 3 to 5 year strategy. And the title of that document is sustainability, because I think that's the big mega trend for the next decade. So through that lens, we're asking the question, which markets are going to benefit from sustainability and which ones aren't? So, we have no decisions on that yet, but our job is to make sure we move increasingly into those markets which we think are going to be faster growth markets of the future. And those which we think are slower growth or where regulation change may move us offside rather than onside, we will exit those where we think that's appropriate, or we would reduce our impacts and our resource commitments in there. So yes, I mean, in a roundabout way, it's not answering the question, but that's our philosophy, and there isn't any big movements to talk about now, but we always keep a watching brief on that.
Thanks, Steve. A couple for Stuart and the sustainability team, I think. Firstly, Andrew at UBS has asked, are we using external verification? And Marek at PGGM has asked, how do we measure the impact on our clients, i.e. the positive effect of our products on their operations?
Yeah, thank you, David. I think in terms of verification, the easiest one to talk about is the climate area. Our emissions are verified. They're verified to the very highest standard. We have been doing that for a long time, and it's really important that we do that. We've approached a philosophy in our whole strategy here, which is we need to get everything verified. It needs to be credible. It needs to be independently monitored. So over a period of time, we intend to get the whole gambit independently verified. The second part of the question was about how will we measure impacts on our clients. I don't know if Chris can hear me and is able to join. It probably isn't actually, because Chris does a lot of work in this area. So I'll probably reply on behalf of Chris. Oh, you are, Chris. Go ahead.
Okay, Stuart, I'm here. Yes, thank you. Well, sticking with climate, actually, emissions up and down the supply chain are a key measure. As Stuart said, they're quantified and validated through the CDP and Climate Smart. In terms of validating our customers, validating our contribution, we are supplying greenhouse gas emissions to those customers who request, and more importantly, quantifying the carbon reduction opportunities our ingredients supply. And again, to mention again, eco, bio-based surfactants, is a very significant contributor to that.
Thank you, Chris. A follow-up question here from Tom at Citi. He's asked, can you pass through higher costs with a renewable tag?
Do you want me to say that, David? It's Phil.
Yes, please.
Yeah, just to comment, I mean, so there's a couple of points to make here. First one to make is moving to renewable or more sustainable doesn't always come with a higher raw material price tag or processing price tag. Those two things aren't directly related. And the second thing is that, as Steve's talked about, Croda's got a laser-like focus on customers and customer needs. And this is much more about where there's value for customers in using our products, and particularly as we move to more sustainable products. So our focus is on helping our customers generate value, and behind that, Croda will generate more value.
Thank you, Phil. While you're on the line, Sophia AGF has asked what our EU taxonomy alignment looks like.
Yeah, and look, thank you, Sophie, and for those of you not up to speed on EU taxonomy, it's the EU dictionary of what may or may not be defined as sustainable. These aren't yet being applied in practical terms. They're being thought through and planned through, so we're actively reviewing this. I mean, generally, they are looking to define sustainable activities as doing no significant harm and contributing to environmental goals. So as you've heard through the session, we believe we're pretty well positioned here, and we'll be focused on that. This should, we believe, be a positive move for Croda, and as a leader, we support it in general. But we're still working through the detail in terms of direct impact for Croda.
Okay, thank you. Another related question from Martin at HSBC. He'd like to know, are the competition catching up in terms of renewable raw material sourcing?
I'll take that one, Phil. Well, let me kick off, and you can add to that. I think it's inevitable that they have to. Whether they're catching up or not is a different question. But it's the same question that we had this morning in the first part of the session. A lot of people, a lot of the industry, virtually all the industry, has to move to more renewable ingredients. But everybody starts from a different position, and I think it's inevitable that all of the petrochemical-based organisations have a bigger challenge. But they all, definitely through their new product development and positioning, will be looking at how do you get more renewable in their portfolios, or more natural, or more organic, and you can hear a lot of the buzzwords. But it does take time, and sometimes the opportunity to do that takes a lot longer than you think. But yes, we would hope. I think everybody will start to move increasingly towards that. And I think the other thing I'd point out before I pass to Phil is that a lot of our big multinational customers are making big statements at the moment. You've seen the Unilever statement around moving to naturally bio-based ingredients away from fossil fuels in home care. L'Oreal are doing the same. I'm sure others will follow. The industry leaders are leading, and the industry will follow. So that will drive change inevitably, and we're in a good position to capitalise on that for Croda. Phil?
Yes, Steve, like you said, we touched on this before in the previous Q&A, but the only point I'd add is you're right, the MNCs will be dragging the whole industry forward in this area. It is a challenge for many in this sector because their supply chains are back integrated often into petrochemical, and bio-based supplies are a bit of a different breed. So we've got a lifetime of experience of engaging with this upstream sector. But yeah, the industry is being moved towards that way. In the EU, the target is 25% across the sector of bio-based. Croda by 2030 are looking to be 75%.
Okay, thank you. There's a personal question here from Dawid at 91 Investments. He's asked, do you see more stringent rules for natural, organic and bio-based labelling? Jen?
Do you want me to jump in here? Yeah. That's something that a lot of people have been asking for quite a while. There was great hope a few years ago that a new ISO standard would really help to bring global clarification here. So we now have and have had for a couple of years ISO 16128. To be fair, I think it doesn't seem to go far enough for many people in the process of putting it together, trying to keep people happy. It seems not to have gone far enough. So I do expect there to be more progress on natural and organic labelling so that consumers know what they're really getting when they see words like that being used. I think there's more to come.
Okay, thank you, Jen. And a couple of questions on life sciences. The first from Jack at JD Vistas. He's asked, does Croda have an active role in COVID-19 vaccine development? Steve?
Yeah, many know that we bought Biosector, the vaccine adjuvant business, a couple of years ago, and also more recently Avanti, who have a role to play in that as well. I think the story remains the same. We're active, we're supporting them. I think the most important thing is that we get a vaccine or a few vaccines from the major pharmaceutical producers, just for the good of the world. And you can't get a better innovation story than bringing vaccines out at the moment, and probably never can. So we're doing our bit. We're still sampling relentlessly to many, and we'll see what happens. Confidentiality stops us talking about any individual relationships, but these things have got a habit of they're quite tricky to get vaccine approval. There's two things. Well, there's three things. They've got to be proven from an effectiveness point of view. They've then got to be safe, which means they've got to be allowed. I think that the approval time is around 2 months from once people have had the vaccine before they can get clearance to use the vaccine. And then thirdly, they've got to scale them up, and scale them up isn't easy, particularly when you're scaling up to the mass market. So all of that takes time. So our job at the moment is just to support them with sampling and expanded samples and trial quantities and the like. And we'll see what happens. But at the moment, it's let's hope we can get vaccines for next year.
Thank you. From Oliver at HSBC, one for Nick, I think. How do you contribute to ensuring that pesticides don't run off and damage waterways?
Yeah, thanks for your question, Oliver. I mean, the basis of the formulation design that we undertake with our adjuvant technologies and our soil health and spray drift technologies to do exactly that. What we aim to do is to make sure that every single part of that active ingredient is located on the leaf or around the seed or into the soil where it's needed, and that minimises the potential for runoff into the watercourses and minimises the environmental impact. So it's very much at the heart of what we do.
Thank you, Nick. There's a few questions around the climate positive presentation that Julia gave in the first section. I'll just ask a couple of these. So Ronnie at NatWest has asked, besides carbon, what other greenhouse gases are emitted in the production process? And he'd also like to know, what's the likely split between carbon reduction and offset to reach net zero? Julia.
Yeah, thanks, David. We measure all other relevant greenhouse gas emissions for Croda. So that would be VOCs, small amounts of refrigerants, but these are very, very insignificant for us. And so we don't report them separately. We just combine all of our emissions to talk about CO2 equivalents. And then on the second question around offset, we plan to remove all carbon from our operations by 2050. And we do expect that there'll be some residual emissions within our supply chain. But it's important to note that to achieve net zero, we'll be looking for permanent greenhouse gas removals from the atmosphere, not offset. So there may be some offsetting along the way, which can help drive behaviour change and potentially consumer engagement. But we need to be taking greenhouse gas back out of the atmosphere for us to be able to achieve net zero.
Thank you. A people positive question from Matthew at Elgin. And he's interested in the Croda Foundation and also our approach to partnerships. Stuart, is that something you'd like to lead on?
Yeah, happy to do so. I think one of the things that struck us when we looked really closely at the SDGs and our business, we were very strong on environment. We now realise that we've got a lot to offer in people and land, so nature, if you like. But we felt that the foundation could kind of really balance the whole piece right across. So actually doing good in the communities in which we operate, not necessarily just by gifting money, although money will be involved, but it's more about helping communities have some longevity in some of the initiatives that we support. So combining our smart science with our our can-do attitude and our, the goodwill of our people, plus a little bit of money on top to actually further those causes. And we feel that we can probably address some of the other SDGs that are not a direct hit for us. So, some of them are a very obvious hit and we can do an awful lot of good. But the ones that are kind of a little bit to the left and right, we feel that we can do that through the foundation.
Thanks, Stuart. And I think it's probably the final question this afternoon. Again, a people positive question. How difficult will it for us to achieve gender balance, given that the industry is male dominated? Steve?
Yeah, very, very good question, and something certainly close to our hearts. I think we all start from the positions we start in is the first point. But second point for Croda would be making sure that we have balanced shortlists for all senior appointments, which we are doing now, we have done for quite some time. And also appointing into critical roles. And what I mean by that is now we've got, and we've never had them for many years, but now we've got 2 or 3 site heads which are female. We have a head of purchasing, sourcing that Stuart talked about earlier for traceability, transparency, which is female as well. So into those those traditional roles, which have always been filled by males, we're actually appointing females in, and that will drive the right behaviour, and we'll have more role models in those areas for the next generation of females to come through. And I think as we look at our stats, our male-female ratio stats at the top, senior team, it's going in the right direction in that respect as well. So, you know, we're starting, it's a journey, but we're encouraged with where we are, but there's still a lot of hard work to continue with.
I think that's all that we've got time for, and gets us through the majority of the questions that we've received this afternoon. We'll answer any technical questions that we haven't covered in the Q&A directly with those individuals who asked the questions. I'll now hand over to Steve for a brief wrap-up.
Yeah, thanks everybody, and thanks for the engagement this afternoon, and also thanks to the Croda team as well. We're in several locations. You can imagine with COVID, it's not easy to try and put this type of event on, but I hope you feel like you've got something out of it. A lot of it's targeted at positioning Croda for the future and the many opportunities that will be created for that. But also, we appreciate there's a lot of here and now questions, particularly for the technical experts on the call as well, and hopefully we've answered those questions. We will respond to all the questions separately. We'll make sure we do that. But I hope you found it certainly engaging, interesting, and maybe even inspiring in some places. So thanks very much for the contribution, and we'll see you soon, as they say.